So let me ask you this. How many times has somebody asked you, how old were you when you learned X? Hi, my name is Jason Bowers, financial planner. Welcome to my channel. So in today's conversation, I want to share another story about spending time with my dad. As many of you know, especially the ones that know me well, that's where I learned my most valuable lessons is conversations with my dad. Typically over coffee somewhere, sometimes in the truck, driving until what I felt like forever, in the middle of a truck stop, grabbing a bite to eat, or heck, just, going for a visit. Those conversations that I had with him, I've learned some of the most valuable lessons. And I know people learn differently. They learn visually. Sometimes they need to have that experience, as I've mentioned before. You got to have that experience in order to learn that lesson. I've even mentioned on a previous conversation here that my dad taught me that sometimes you can learn that experience, learn that lesson without needing to even go through that experience by learning from the experiences of others. But today, I really wanted to talk about what we call common sense. And if you don't know something, it's not common sense to you until somebody teaches it to you. And we've all had those moments where, whether it's at work or in a personal relationship, where somebody teaches us something and we're like, wow, God, where has that been my entire life? That seems so simple. It seems like common sense. But until 30 seconds ago, it was unbeknownst to you. And I find that a lot in the financial services industry, and I'll tie all that together in a second. But the thing that my dad taught me that at the moment really meant nothing to me because I was a young person. And the older I get and the more that I reminisce about these conversations with my dad, the more that those light bulb moments go off. Like, gosh, that's what he was trying to teach me at that time. And one of the chores that I had growing up is, as many of you know, my dad was a truck driver, and he was what we call an owner operator. So he had his own truck, he had his own trailer. He had his kind of own little business, and then he delivered loads across the country for the company that he worked for with his own equipment. So that's an owner operator, and drive a company truck. So where we lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I grew up in a trailer park, and we had about a quarter-acre lot with zero grass. It was all either weeds or dirt, as well as the house and the garage. So my dad would bring the truck and the trailer home, plenty of room to park it there. And one of my chores was when he wanted to wash the truck, if I was home, I was out there helping him. And it was that big bucket filled with soapy water and this brush that he used that at the time I felt like was 10 feet long, but it was probably a 6 foot long brush. But here I am, probably 8 years old out there helping him wash the truck. And one of the things that he taught me as he's washing the truck is you always start top down, right? You wash at the top, and more importantly, you start rinsing from the top. And in the moments, I'm not really paying attention, don't really understand. I'm like, Dad, dude, we just got to get this clean. I got better things to do, right? But at the end of the day, he's trying to teach me a lesson. He's like, it makes no sense to start at the bottom. You get that nice and clean, and then you start to wash and rinse from the top, and all that dirty water and soapy water runs right on down to where you clean. So I do remember going through that process with my dad and getting ready to finish up. And the last thing he does is the tires and the wheels, because those are typically the most dirty. And at the end of the day, that just washes straight onto the ground. But when somebody shares that with you, whether we're washing our own vehicle, you're washing the windows, or you're paying somebody to power wash your house, they always start at the top and work their way down. And now that I know that and I see it in practice, I'm like, well, that's common sense. Like, why would you not do that? But it goes back to 8-year-old me, where it wasn't common sense. I had no idea. If he had just given me the tools to go out there to wash the truck, there is no way I'm starting at the top of that truck and working my way down. He's probably standing on the porch taking notes, all the things that I'm doing incorrectly. But because I spent those moments with him washing that truck in the Albuquerque sun, washing it in what turns out to be mud because it's the sand turns to mud that we're washing it on, I learned a lot of lessons, just not in that moment. But as I had time to reflect on those moments, it became common sense to me. So when you think about how does that transition over to the financial services industry, well, there's several different ways. One of the most common ways is when somebody shares, hey, this is what I did. And sometimes it's not appropriate for your situation, but for that person, it was common sense. It made sense for their situation. But there's times when I have conversations with people, and just generally speaking, they ask questions. I get this question all the time. Should I save into a Roth component or into a traditional component? And when I share with them, well, do you believe you're going to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement and have more income then? Or do you believe you have more income now than you will in retirement? And for everybody, the answer could be different. But once I deliver kind of those numbers to that, hey, you're making $225,000 now of taxable income. Do you believe you'll have that same amount of taxable income in retirement? Jason, I'll be nowhere close. I'm going to have Social Security and then, distributions, yada, yada, yada. Then it becomes a no-brainer of what bucket to save into. Another key aspect to think about, a no-brainer, is thinking about what is the most important thing that needs to be saved prior to building any type of investment strategy. And I share with people that's going to be your emergency fund. And I explain the reasons why behind that. Congratulations, you have $100,000 saved in your 401k, but you only have $1,000 in your emergency fund. And the first time you have an emergency, you got to dip into your 401k. So that emergency fund needs to be established first. And when people hear that, like, gosh, that makes perfect sense. And the final kind of one that I'll tie in here at the beginning is mortgage interest. The amount of times that I work with clients and I say, hey, we need to pay off your mortgage, for example, because that's going to be best for your overall long-term financial plan and the goals you want to achieve. And that they've come back at me I don't want to pay off my mortgage because then I lose the tax deduction on the interest. And I'm like, all right, time out. Let's put some dollars to this, right? So if you pay $4,000 in interest in a year, which is quite a bit, but just to keep numbers nice and simple, and you're in a 20% effective tax rate, give or take, 20% of that $4,000 is $800. So you're saving $800 a year in taxes. So what would you rather have? Would you rather have no mortgage payment and lose that $800 in savings, or would you rather maintain that $800 in savings and continue to make your $2,500 a month mortgage payment? When I present that to clients, they look at that and like, well, Jason, that's a no-brainer. I was like, exactly. So now it's common sense to you, but before we had this conversation, to you, the common sense was, well, I like the tax deduction, so I need to maintain my mortgage because I get that. So, and there's many different kind of small aspects that once you work with a professional and they explain the aspects of that particular concept and how it applies to your situation, it now becomes your common sense. You're now learning that lesson in the moment. And we tend to be a little bit more in the moment when we learn those lessons. The older we are, the 8-year-old version of me was not in the moment when my dad was trying to teach me that lesson of starting at the top of the truck and working your way down when you wash it. But as I was able to grow in age and maturity and life experience, I could reflect on those moments, say, there's my light bulb moment. That's what my dad was trying to teach me. So that's the importance of finding somebody that you like, and you trust to work with you inside of your financial situation, because they're going to bring those aspects to the front of the page for you. They're going to challenge the way that you've always thought. It doesn't mean that you're wrong necessarily, but you can't be wrong if you don't know what the right answer is or the right concept might be, because you feel like you're right and you're right based off of what you know. But when somebody then teaches you something different and challenges the way that you thought for your entire life about whatever it may be, but here we're talking about finances, then they force you to take something else into consideration, an alternative perspective, which then, now that you know that and you apply that to what you've been doing, now could put you in a situation where maybe you are making the wrong decision because of this new information. Look, you'll hear me over and over again on these videos that the most important thing you can do is arm yourself with information before any decision. And a lot of that information is going to come from professionals who have that information already, as opposed to you jumping on Google for a week straight trying to gather all that information. So it's learning those lessons that then turn those lessons learned into common sense for you. And we find ourselves teaching that to our own kids and hoping and praying that they take the same lessons that we learned in the past and learn them as they grow older and they have the time to reflect. But I tell you what, it's the more that I reflect on the different moments that I had with my dad, and I continue to have every time I go and visit. And now that he's retired, he's got nothing but time on his hands. So he's all about telling stories and talking. And when he shares stories about us in the past, it's great to hear, because I can go back and think about where my mind was at in that moment and the lessons that I've been able to learn now. And here on the channel, and I want to kind of start a series that talks a little bit about, lessons from my dad, over those conversations over coffee with him, or just realized, in the moment. And that's really kind of shaped me who I am today, and the lessons that I teach my own daughter and that I then also teach clients are things that I've learned from the past. And a lot of those over some of those great moments with my dad. And I hope I have many more of those moments, going forward. And I hope that my daughter is able to reflect on some of the things that I'm teaching her. And now that she's 18 and she has her job, some of those are going to be, heavily leaned into finance and getting her to save early and things of that nature. And I know, right now I have those conversations with her. She gets these little tiny paychecks from her part-time job, and I'm like, 20% goes to savings. She's like, Dad, I don't understand. I don't get it. But that's the 18-year-old version of her. And hopefully the 28-year-old version, and definitely the 38-year-old version, is going to look back and say, I know what he was trying to teach me. I get it now, right? There's that light bulb moment. And at that point, it will become common sense to her that she needs to save a chunk of her paycheck. Right now, she just doesn't understand the importance and the long-term impact of that. So with that being said, it's not common sense to her. So the term common sense means it should be common to just about everybody, but unfortunately it's not. There's a lot of things that should be common sense to everybody, but it's simply not. There are people out there who lack that generality of the common sense word. But when it comes to finances, don't beat yourself up for not knowing the most simplistic things. That's why people like myself are around. We have the experience, we have the knowledge, we have the practicality of executing those things inside of people's financial plans. Tap into our knowledge. It's the quickest way to get you to what you need to know in order to execute something within your personal financial situation. So I look forward to the series. I look forward to sharing some more moments that I've had with my dad over the years. Some of them serious, some of them where I felt my life was threatened in a way, but there's other times that are going to be hilarious. And sometimes people wonder why I'm still alive with the way that I lived as a young boy growing up. So I lived a fearless life in my younger years and learned a lot of lessons the hard way. So I'm looking forward to share some of those. So again, thanks for taking time today, and I hope you enjoyed the video.